Welcome to the channel. I'm Cody Stoots. Let's talk some Texans as they move to 3-3 on the season, taking down the New Orleans Saints 20-13. It was one of the uglier games that resulted in a victory in Texans history. We'll talk about it, some of the good and bad from this. Physicality and resiliency, the name of the day for the defense. The second half, man, that was rough to watch, but the Texans get it done. There's no style points in the NFL. You win, you move on, and you try to learn from some of the issues that you had in that game. We'll talk about it on the video today. In the description down below, you can find Houston football, where I do all my writing about the Texans. The 11 observations and then some from this game are up at Houston football. On your way to the description down below, hit the thumbs up on this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Let's start with just the fact that the Texans won an ugly game. A week after they almost won an ugly game but came up short, they were able to win an ugly game. That's a lot of growth in 1 week for a young team with a first-year head coach, a first-year offensive coordinator, a rookie quarterback, and a bunch of moving pieces in and out of the lineup on offense and defense. That's a really good job by the Texans to get a win. They're 3-3 heading into the bye week with a lot of input that they can go through to change the output after the bye week to make things look better. The self-scout will be important on the bye week, figuring out some of their tendencies, fixing some of the things that they are not good at right now as a team. They've got a lot. And the opponents that they have coming out of the bye week, it's not world beaters. It's the winless Carolina Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as those next two teams. You're staring at an opportunity to be 2 games above 500, taking on the Cincinnati Bengals in November. That's very much in front of the Texans. That was not going to be in front of the Texans. If they lost this game, they won this game. It was ugly. That's one of the worst second halves of football I've seen this team play in a long time. And we watched some really bad football last year. I understand they did enough, but to get 2 first downs of your own doing in the second half, to get less than 60 yards total in the second half, 31 of those come on the Dalton Schultz play in that second half, that was not a good second half of football. The Saints committed some penalties that kept some Texans drives alive. The Texans had the ball at the goal line, couldn't punch it in for something that would have helped put the Saints away. That was a really bad half of football. Plus, you got a little lucky. The Saints missed 2 field goals that should have been made field goals, one really easy one. Now, once they missed one, they still needed a touchdown there at the end of the game to win it. But if they had made both of those field goals, all they need is a field goal to win the football game. You might have been sitting here lamenting that you lost another close one if you're the Texans had they made some of those field goals. But in the NFL, sometimes you get lucky. Okay, the Texans have been an unlucky franchise for it feels like 20-plus years. So sometimes you get lucky. The opposing team's not very good. The opposing team can't make consistent plays. The opposing team turtles in the fourth quarter and throws the ball behind the sticks, a couple of yards behind the sticks, a couple of times, and you're able to get a big fourth down stop. The opposing quarterback just throws the ball to nobody on a bunch of deep passes. Like sometimes you get a little lucky, and sometimes your opponent's not very good, and you're just a tiny bit better, and that's where the Texans are. They won an ugly football game. Too many times you see young coaches, young coaching staffs, young quarterbacks, you see them lose ugly football games. We saw it last week with this team. Last week with this team, they lost an ugly football game that they probably shouldn't have lost. The second halves have to be better, especially after they had a very solid first half. There was a lot to be excited about with the way they put things together in the first half. They've got to be better in the second half. And that kind of snowballs into my next point. Yes, congratulations to the defense. They took care of business. They forced some field goals. They forced the Saints into field goal situations when they're clearly not confident in their kicking situation. They helped flip the field a couple of times with the defense after some good Cam Johnston punts, and then ultimately Steven Nelson seals it there with the interception at the end. So credit to the defense. The offense is supposed to put teams like the Saints away. The offense is supposed to be able to move the football, get you first downs, burn clock. I mean, you look at what this team has been able to do at different times, the way that they've operated offensively, you've got to be able to do more than 30 some odd yards of offense in 20 some odd plays outside of that Dalton Schultz play in the second half. You've got to be able, when you get the ball back with about 3 minutes, to tick that thing down, force the Saints to use a bunch of timeouts. The Saints got the ball back with a 2-minute warning still in effect and a couple of timeouts. They had more than enough time to get down the field and try to make something happen and get back in to that game against the Texans. And ultimately, they got pretty much into the red zone and just came up a little bit short. They just didn't have the juice, didn't have the talent, in large part because the Texans had beat them up over the course of the game. You've got to perform better on offense. And I understand what Nico Ryans is trying to do. They get about midfield. They run the ball on first down. They lose a couple yards. Now it's 2nd and 12. They threw the ball 2 times. And I get throwing the ball in that moment. Like, I understand why you throw it. Nico Ryans said after the game, when I asked him about it, he said, we believed in our guys. We believed in our offense to go in there and get some yards. And if you just get enough, maybe you put yourself in a situation where you feel pretty good about that 3rd down play, gives you some options, or maybe you feel like you just want to set Cam Johnson up with a little bit more yardage so he can put the Saints deep, and then you trust that defense again. So I understand why they were throwing it. I didn't love the plays that they called. That's kind of a theme with Bobby Slowik. I like some of the decisions this organization makes in their aggressiveness and in going for it. I think about some of the 4th down calls that the team has made. I've pretty much agreed with most of the 4th down calls that the Texans have put together. I agreed with trying to throw the ball once, at least in that 2nd and 3rd down in that next to last drive that the Texans had. I agreed with throwing it. I didn't agree with the type of plays that they ran. Part of that's on C.J. Stroud, too. He's got to be able to just go and make the play and understand this can't hit the ground. So you got to run for a couple of yards and burn the clock, or you got to take a sack, or you got to make a sure-handed throw that maybe doesn't gain yards but keeps the clock going. So part of that's on C.J. Stroud, and that's a learning opportunity for Nico Ryans in the, hey, Bobby, throw it if you want to. Bobby Slowik and the what plays are we going to call if we're going to throw it, and C.J. Stroud and how you operate when you're in that situation and throwing it. But that offense has to be able to close teams out. They weren't able to do it. The defense takes care of business, and the Texans get the win. But it's something to pay attention to with this Texans team because it looked good in the first half on offense, and then they had some adjustments made against them. They allowed a little bit more pressure. C.J. Stroud wasn't as crisp in the second half as he was in the first half. The next thing you know, the Saints are able to put some points on the board, and they're driving to try to tie the football game, and the Texans' offense is nowhere to be found there in the second half. We saw it last week against Atlanta, and before that final drive, the Texans' offense was nowhere to be found. They've got to be better coming out of halftime. They've got to be better when they have a lead and adding to that lead. That's what was great about the Pittsburgh game. They had the lead, and they continued to pound away and put pressure on the Steelers. They did the same thing against Jacksonville, and those are the 2 best games that they've played this season. They've got to be able to add to when they have a small lead or a medium-sized lead and put that thing out of distance for that other team. So a couple of those things, not great about this Texans game. One thing I did love about this Texans performance is the physicality and the resiliency that this defense showcased. This was one of the more physical performances from the defense, and it's headlined by 2 guys. One, you expected this, and he sort of sets the tone, and that's Jimmy Ward. I think back to the play where there were 3 Saints, and there was Jimmy Ward and one other defender over on the sideline, and the ball had ended up in Alvin Kamara's hands. And Jimmy Ward just takes on the blocker, drives the blocker into Kamara, and ultimately falls off the blocker and pushes Kamara out of bounds and forces a punt for the Saints. That was a great job by Jimmy Ward. He was all over the place. He was diving in there on rush plays, and the Saints still rattled off some nice running plays in this game. Kamara had some 5-yard carries, some 7-yard carries. It had a little bit more juice there in the second half. We've seen that from opposing running backs. But Jimmy Ward was in there making some plays. He had a big day. And Blake Cashman is the best linebacker on this team right now. And if he's not the best, if you don't want to say it that way, then Blake Cashman's playing the best of all the linebackers on this team right now. He was incredible. He had a couple of moments in coverage where they got to him. I think he made a play where He made a play, I think it was a tackle for a loss or a big stop or something like that. And then the very next play, he missed the tackle out on the edge. But ultimately, Cashman had a really nice day. He is a really nice find for this Texans team. A guy that a few years ago was an afterthought in New York, a failure with the Jets. The Texans add him. He's a special teams contributor. He plays really well in training camp. And he's gone out there and earned the opportunity to be one of the linebackers that they trust on this team. It's a really good job by him. It's a really good job by this organization to not only identify him as a potential piece, a small piece for this team, but a great job by Nico Ryans and this staff to coach up a guy like Blake Cashman and turn him into a player that they can count on in these key moments and these games where he has played really, really well. The defensive line was pretty physical. You had some moments where I think Dylan Horton had a nice play for a tackle for a loss or for a stuff. Will Anderson was firing through. He set up one of the sacks. He set up the Malik Collins, Jonathan Grenard sack. He sort of fired through the offensive line. It forced Carr to step up, and then Grenard and Malik Collins did it's kind of like a Mortal Kombat fatality where one goes high, one goes low, and it looked like they cut Derek Carr in half. Sheldon Rankins had a really, really nice play that ruined a Saints drive as well. He was physical at the point of attack. And look, they allow some nice runs from the opposing team, and they allow some catches from the opposing team, but they don't break, man. They force a lot of kicks. I mean, they are content if you get 8 yards on first down, they're content to let you get another 7 yards on second down and get a fresh set of downs and try to make it happen. Texans played pretty well on third down. I don't have the stats right in front of me, but I just remember them forcing, obviously, a lot of kicks with the Saints punting and the Saints kicking. They kicked the field goals, or they kicked the 2 field goals that they missed, in large part because the Texans forced them into those situations. So the physicality and then the resiliency, you saw it just the team playing better overall on defense than they did last week. Look, Carr still had one of his best passing days of the season. This guy came in with less than 200 passing yards in the past 3 games, and then he went for a big day through the air, but they didn't allow any of that to get into the end zone. There were a couple of big plays that just his guys made, and maybe a busted play here or there. Steven Nelson drops the pick 6 and gets haunted immediately the next play as they go deep on Steven Nelson. And it looked like maybe he was supposed to have a little safety help. He was quite animated. But talking to him after the game, he said, look, this is a team of resiliency. We wanted to bounce back from what we did last week. And when we gave up big plays in this game, we wanted to, again, bounce back. And Steven Nelson's probably the best example of that. He gave up a couple of big plays, but he ends up getting the interception there at the end. And Nelson was in on some nice plays outside of the big plays. He's played really well up to this point. It's cornerback. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have days when the other team just has your number and they pick on you. Well, Nelson had their number there at the very end. Petrie still not showing up to the same level as last year statistically, but he's still knifing in there on run plays and still a guy that does his job really well. Shaq Griffin got attacked a couple of times. You saw the flags fly on him a little bit in this game, but ultimately I liked what the defense was able to put together in totality for the game. You'd love to see them maybe make a big play, just a game changer, a big game-changing sack. But Carr's getting rid of the ball fast. It felt like they were close on a couple of those pass rushes, but the book's out on the Texans. You got to get rid of the rock, and if you get rid of the rock and you run a crisp route, you're usually going to have a chance for your wide receiver to make a play. I'll be interested to see what this team looks like after the bye week, after they've had some time to digest some of how teams are attacking them, and then ultimately when Derek Stingley returns, I'll be interested to see what they look like from a pass defense standpoint as a defense. The final point here about C.J. Stroud, man, some of the stuff he does, he makes it look so easy. It's not supposed to look as easy as it does. I think about the big crosser to Nico Collins. Marshawn Lattimore is one of the better cornerbacks in football. He's right there on Nico Collins, and C.J. Stroud just, oh, there's Nico. Whoop. And he just makes a perfect throw, a really hard throw that if it's a little bit too far back, Marshawn Lattimore at least breaks it up, maybe intercepts it. If it's too far in front of Nico Collins, you don't make the play. But Stroud makes some of that hard stuff look easy. I thought overall it was not one of his best days at the quarterback spot. Certainly not as good as some of the previous performances that C.J. Stroud has had. Thought he broke the pocket a couple of times when the offense had held up really well. The offensive line had held up really well. I thought he broke the pocket a couple of times when he didn't have to. Maybe didn't quite see a guy here or there when he was maneuvering around with the pocket. One of those sacks that the Texans did give up in the second half, I'm putting on C.J. Stroud. He just kind of kept backing up. You got to try to get rid of the rock to somebody or roll out to the side so it's easier to get rid of the football. So not the best game from C.J. Stroud, but the Dalton Schultz play, the big play to get some yards, to find his wide receivers when they're in a close matchup, and then the wide receivers able to draw the pass interference penalties to set some things up. That's a good job by C.J. Stroud, and he didn't let anything get away from him. Sometimes young quarterbacks, when they throw an interception, they're ready to throw another one. Well, by the grace of Nico Collins playing his ass off, the first interception for C.J. Stroud barely stays with the Saints because Nico Collins comes in there, knocks that thing away. Titus Howard falls on it. The Texans keep the ball, and they march down for a touchdown. And the touchdown pass to Schultz wasn't as crisp as you would have liked, but to bounce back from that interception, and C.J. Stroud talked about it after the game, just the way his teammates talked to him, they didn't want it to be a big deal. Okay, they didn't want it to be a big deal. They told him, hey, we trust you. You're fine. Nothing to worry about. And then I thought C.J. Stroud had a great point about it. He said, look, I believe in myself too. They got me once. They're not going to get me again. Well, they didn't get C.J. Stroud again. Sometimes young guys, even some of the really good quarterbacks, when you throw one, sometimes they come in bunches. They didn't for C.J. Stroud. Enough from the offense on Sunday against the Saints to get things done. The defense takes care of their business, and the Texans are now 3-3 heading into the bye week. After the bye week, the Carolina Panthers in Carolina await, following a home game with a matchup against the Buccaneers after that Panthers game. Is it 5-3? I'd be disappointed at this point if it's not 5-3 3 weeks from now. If 3 weeks from now we're not talking about a 5-3 Houston Texans team, it might be a little disappointing here for this Texans team. Bye weeks always seem to come at a good time. Yes, you might want to play Carolina next week because you feel like you kind of got something. The bye week shows up, you get Carolina coming out of it, and you start looking around at the AFC South. Trevor Lawrence has got a knee injury. Anthony Richardson might be lost for the year, and Gardner Minshew didn't play well on Sunday, and the Titans are a damn disaster. The AFC South is there. The AFC South is there for the taking. They've got to play much better than they did against the New Orleans Saints to be a factor in the AFC South, though. You're not going to go on a big run. You're not going to consistently win football games if you can't put together 4 quarters. They only put together really like 2.5 quarters against the Saints. It was enough because the Saints played a really bad brand of football on Sunday, so it was enough against the Saints. That's not always going to be the case on Sundays. The best part about it, this coaching staff, both offensively and defensively, they have done a good job in showcasing that they can adjust, tweak, and get things going. You think about getting the rushing attack going with a little Mike Boone, a little Devin Singletary, some of those Xavier Hutchinson runs to get things going, to simulate that. It was a good job to get the rushing attack going in the first half. You would have liked to see a little bit more there in the second half, certainly, but lots to clean up and work on. And I don't feel like the Texans are popping champagne just because they equaled last year's win total. Sheldon Rankins in the locker room after the game, he said, look, I came from New Orleans when I started my career. We were competing for division championships every year. That's what I expect. I've got like-minded individuals in this locker room that expect to succeed. He's like, rebuild's not something we pay attention to. He's like, we're here to win and have success now. Well, let's see if they can put that into practice after the bye week. Appreciate you checking out the video. Plenty of videos on the channel to check out. Plenty more coming this week here on the channel. So subscribe so you don't miss anything. Throw me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video. Get in the comment section. What did I miss? What do I need to pay attention to? What do you want to talk about with this Texans team as the bye week is here? The comment section always active. Love hearing from you there. And on your way to the comment section in the description, check out Houston Football, where I do all my writing about the Houston Texans. Appreciate you watching the video. Can't wait till we talk Texans again soon.